The drug was supposed to save lives. Instead, it became one of the biggest medical scandals in history, and the warning signs were there the whole time. Millions of people were desperate for an answer. Obesity rates were climbing. Doctors were overwhelmed. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, a new drug arrived. One that promised to do what decades of diets and willpower had failed to do. Lose the weight. Keep it off. Change your life. The pharmaceutical company behind it ran the ads. Doctors wrote the prescriptions. Insurance companies covered it. And patients, real people who had struggled their entire lives, finally felt like someone had handed them a lifeline. But behind the glossy brochures and clinical trial data, something was being ignored. Reports were being buried. Side effects were being downplayed. And by the time the truth came out, the damage had already been done. Inside the bodies of hundreds of thousands of people who had trusted the system to protect them. This is not just a story about a bad drug. It's a story about how a bad drug gets approved, gets marketed, gets defended, and how the people who were supposed to sound the alarm stayed silent for far too long. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on everything. The science, the cover-up, the victims, and the institutions that failed them. This is the weight loss drug that became a public health disaster, known as fen-phen. But to understand how it all fell apart, you have to go back to the beginning. The science actually made sense. Researchers had spent years studying how the brain regulates hunger, and they found something interesting. Certain chemicals, when manipulated the right way, could essentially tell your body it was full. No cravings, no obsessive thoughts about food. For people who had fought their weight their entire lives, that wasn't a small thing. That was everything.
Early trials looked clean. Patients were losing weight. Doctors were excited. And when the results hit the medical journals, the media did what the media does. They ran with it. Magazine covers, morning show segments. The phrase game changer got thrown around so many times, it lost all meaning. And the public? They believed it. Why wouldn't they? The study said it worked. The doctors were prescribing it. The FDA had signed off. It felt like a genuine breakthrough, the kind that only comes around once in a generation. And for a moment, it really did look like one. And then, the floodgates opened. Prescriptions went through the roof almost overnight. Pharmacies couldn't keep up with demand. Doctors who had never even specialized in weight management were writing scripts by the thousands because patients were walking in and asking for it by name. That's how big this got. People weren't waiting for their doctor to bring it up. They were coming in with printed articles, with screenshots, with their minds already made up. They had done their research, or at least what passed for research in the age of before and after photos and influencer testimonials. Because by this point, the drug had escaped the doctor's office entirely. It was on social media. It was in comment sections. It was being whispered about at gyms and book clubs and office lunch breaks. Someone's cousin had lost 30 pounds. Someone's coworker looked unrecognizable. Everyone seemed to know someone who had taken it, and it had worked. The pharmaceutical company was printing money. Their stock price climbed. Executives gave interviews talking about changing the future of medicine. And why not? From where they were sitting, everything was going exactly to plan. But somewhere in the noise, buried under the success stories and the sales figures and the glowing press releases, people were starting to notice things. Small things at first. A side effect here, a complaint there. Nothing that couldn't be explained away. It didn't start with a scientist. It didn't start with a lawsuit. It started with a woman named Karen. She'd been on the drug for 4 months.
lost 18 pounds, felt, for the first time in years, like herself again. And then one morning she woke up with her heart racing so fast she thought she was dying.
She went to the ER. They ran tests, sent her home, told her it was probably stress. She posted about it online, just to see if anyone else had experienced the same thing. Within 48 hours, her inbox was flooded. Hundreds of people. Same drug, same symptoms, same story of being dismissed, reassured, sent home. A woman in Ohio with liver numbers that had quietly tripled. A man in Texas whose doctor couldn't explain why his blood pressure had spiked out of nowhere. A 34-year-old mother who had stopped taking the drug 3 months ago and still didn't feel right.
But some professionals were starting to notice too. A pharmacist in Minnesota kept a personal log of every concerning reaction she observed. A cardiologist in Boston submitted 3 separate adverse event reports to the FDA and never heard back. A researcher at a mid-level university ran the publicly available trial data through a different statistical model. And what came out the other side made him lose sleep. He sent his findings to the company first. Standard practice. They never responded. Because the answer, when those internal documents finally saw daylight, was devastating. Not because it revealed some dramatic villain twirling a mustache in a boardroom, but because it revealed something far more chilling than that. It revealed people making ordinary decisions that added up to an extraordinary betrayal. There was a memo, dated almost 2 years before any public concern surfaced, where a senior medical director flagged an unexpected signal in post-market data. The language was careful, corporate, deliberately vague. But the meaning was clear. They had seen something. They had noted it. And then they had kept moving. There were emails about messaging strategy, about how to respond if the press started asking questions, about which studies to highlight and which ones to describe as inconclusive. There were talking points prepared for sales reps, specific language designed to redirect conversations with concerned doctors without technically lying. They weren't stupid. They knew exactly where the line was, and they stayed just close enough to it to feel protected. The FDA, for its part, was not blameless. Understaffed, underfunded, and, critics would later argue, far too comfortable with the industry it was supposed to be regulating. Reports sat in queues. Reviewers were stretched thin. And the kind of deep, aggressive investigation that the situation called for simply never happened. Not in time, because while the paperwork shuffled and the meetings were held and the carefully worded statements were drafted, real people were taking this drug every single day, trusting it, and paying for that trust in ways they never imagined. The lawsuits came first, then the congressional hearings, then the internal documents that someone, to this day no one knows who, decided the public had a right to see. The drug was pulled from the market on a Tuesday. A brief statement from the company. Regret. A commitment to patient safety. The kind of language that had clearly been drafted weeks in advance and was waiting in a folder somewhere, ready to go. By Friday, the stock had lost 60% of its value. The executives moved on. Some retired. Some landed at other companies. The senior medical director who had written that memo, the one flagging the signal 2 years before anyone went public, gave a single deposition, cited his attorney's advice 47 times, and has not spoken publicly since. No criminal charges were filed. Karen, the woman whose inbox flooded that first night, testified before a Senate subcommittee. She sat at a long table in a room with high ceilings and bad acoustics, and she read from a prepared statement about what the drug had done to her heart and what it felt like to be told, over and over, that what was happening to her body was probably stress. The senators thanked her for her courage. Then they recessed for lunch. There are an estimated 340,000 people in the United States still experiencing health complications linked to the drug. Some of them have filed claims. Many of them haven't because they can't afford a lawyer, or because they don't know their symptoms are connected, or because they've simply stopped expecting the system to work for them. The FDA announced a review of its post-market surveillance process. That review is ongoing. Here's the part that should bother you. This wasn't a story about exceptional greed or exceptional negligence. The people involved weren't cartoon villains. They were professionals, educated, credentialed, mostly well-intentioned people, operating inside systems that made it easier to look away than to look directly. Systems where the incentives pointed in one direction and the courage required to point the other way was never built in. That's not a reassuring conclusion. A villain would be more satisfying. A villain you can arrest. A villain you can point to and say, "That's the problem, and we fixed it." But the actual problem is structural. And structural problems don't get solved by a hearing or a fine or a pulled drug. They get solved slowly, imperfectly, by people who decide that the next time there's a memo, the next time there's a signal, the next time someone's inbox floods, someone in a position to act actually does. We're not there yet. Karen still has a heart arrhythmia. She manages it with medication, different medication, this time. She still posts online sometimes. Not about the drug anymore, just about her life. She has a garden, 2 dogs, a daughter who just started high school. She says she doesn't spend much time thinking about what happened to her. She says that chapter is closed. But when I asked her if she still trusted the system, if she'd take a prescription medication again if her doctor recommended it, she was quiet for a long moment. "I'd like to," she said. "I'd like to be the kind of person who still believes in all of it. I think that's a better way to live." She looked out the window. "I'm working on it.